Cheers. Hello and welcome to Cup of Joe. I'm Joe. And today I'm going to be teaching you how to write a book. This is totally for beginners. I get asked all the time how I do it. So if you are wondering what my qualifications are to be making this video, I have a bachelor's degree in creative writing and English lit. I am getting my master's degree in creative writing. So I've gotten about 1 million reads across my stories on Wattpad.com. And if you don't know what Wattpad is, think the mothership for My Mother Sold Me to One Direction fanfiction and Mafia Harry Styles. And yeah, that's the website you're thinking of. I've also written like 15 books, I think, in general, since I was like 13 years old. But if you don't believe any of that, there's also the adage of the internet. Trust me, bro. Why am I making this video? Well, maybe I'm a little bit tired of people coming up to me being like, I hear you're a writer. I have this great idea for a book, but I don't want to write it. You can though. If you don't have money, don't pitch your book to me. I'm not going to write it for you. I'll listen to it if you're going to write it, but I'm not going to write it for you for free.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Don't approach writers with book concepts that you're not prepared to pay them to write. So first we start with brainstorming. Basically I start with a paragraph. So I imagine if the book were a physical copy, what would be on the back of it, and I write that little synopsis. It's never anything too specific, but it usually introduces character A, character B, what their task is, what they're trying to accomplish, what they want, etc., etc. And then moving from that point, I have a few key things in my noggin to translate into an actual book. So what's really important about having a synopsis is that you have something to go off of, but you also get a feel for what your characters' names are and the conflict and all of that stuff. It's just a vague outline that you can use for later. Very helpful for future reference. But yeah, usually that helps me get the ideas flowing. And then we go into step 2, which is outlining. One of my best friends in the world is a total pantser, never outlines, and she's great at making it look like she did it all on purpose the whole time. I am not one of those people. If I try to discovery write, we end up with plot holes everywhere and a hodgepodge of bad ideas and loose ends, and it's just a mess of work for future me that requires a lot of rewriting, and I don't like doing that. So because I'm lazy, I like to actually go in and do a pretty specific outline. So the first thing I start with is Pinterest. I scroll through Pinterest and I make some mood boards on Canva. I like to kind of feel out the aesthetic of my book. It gives me some muse to draw on while I'm doing the outlining process. And I also make a Spotify playlist. I am a little unhinged. I will scroll and scroll and scroll through all of the songs in my library. I will pick them by vibe, by sound, any of that, and I will put it all together in one playlist. It has to be perfect. I like to imagine if this was a movie, how would I soundtrack it? My nose is running. I better go catch it. I am running against the clock because my camera battery just wants to die all the time. And I mean, you know what? Same.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
That's too damn bad.
Once we get past the head empty, only vibes part of the outlining process, I go into what's called a free tag pyramid. You may have seen it in your 7th grade English class, but it's basically just a form of plot outlining that follows the structure of, like, from the beginning of the story through the rising actions, through the plot, to the climax, and then the falling action resolution. If you're unfamiliar with that concept, that's totally okay. What I also like to do is a 3-act structure. Act 1 sets up your characters, your plot, your conflict. 2 is the rising actions leading up to Act 3, which is where shit gets really, really exciting. You know, that's where the climax of your book is, but also the resolution of your book. I like to do bullet points. Imagine your friend telling you the plot of a movie you've never seen, all of the highlights, you know, spoilers and all, but what would they say is the events of your book, you know, without all of the nitty-gritty recapping every single page? What are the main highlights of each portion of your book? Moving from there, I don't always do a chapter by chapter outline. I mostly do it when I'm ghostwriting for a client because they like to oversee the process, but if I do a chapter by chapter outline, it's just a couple bullet points or a short paragraph explaining what's going on in the chapter, which characters are in it, whose POV it is. Just gives you a backbone to know where you're going while you start drafting. Then we get into drafting. This is the exciting part of the process. Some people hate drafting and prefer to edit. Those people are sociopaths. So while I'm drafting, I use Scrivener. I love Scrivener. I think it's great. The reason I prefer Scrivener over Google Docs or Microsoft Word, especially when writing fantasy, horror, speculative fiction, is that after a certain word/page count, your app will glitch out and crash. I've had Google Docs crash on me so many times.
Sorrows, sorrows, prayers.
So because that's downright tragic and I don't like it when that happens, I just draft on Scrivener. I use Google Docs if I'm sharing the work with somebody else and they're offering feedback, but most of the time I stick to Scrivener and stay away from Google Docs because there's nothing sadder than when your computer crashes and you spend forever staring at the color wheel of death because it doesn't want to load. So once you write the book, that's the hardest part out of the way. I highly recommend just going in there and writing it all out. It doesn't matter if it's messy, it doesn't matter if you have insert exposition here or come back to this later, unhinged notes. That's all for you to edit. What matters is that you're putting the majority of the words on the page and you're writing the damn book.
Just do it!
Then we go into the editing process, which is the last step of the how to write a book movement. I like to use Pages with track changes for the first step. You can also use Microsoft Word, but as I've said before, sometimes for larger word count volumes, your app will quit on you. So I've never had that happen with Pages, which is why I prefer to use it. I think the longest book I've ever written was 135,000 words, and that is a lot, especially for a debut author. So I had to cut it down, and every time I tried to cut it down in Google Docs, it would crash. Highly recommend sticking with Pages. And using track changes allows you to mark it up on the document while you're doing it digitally. I vastly prefer doing that as opposed to worrying about marking it up multiple times and printing out paper, because that's a lot of paper and my printer scares the ever-loving out of my cats. So because I don't want to scare my kitties, I start with Pages with track changes, go through the manuscript, mark it up thing by thing, line by line, and then at the end of each chapter, accept all changes. But as I'm going, it's really helpful to see what I'm cutting, what I'm adding, etc., in a pretty color. You know, the vibes are immaculate. Then once I finish my Pages, Google Docs, whatever run, I move into actually printing the book onto physical sheets of paper, scaring the crap out of my cats, and then going down and marking it with a pen. I have catastrophically horrible handwriting, so deciphering it later is always a task that gives me a headache. But then once you do that, having it laid out in front of you is a really great way to see mistakes that you didn't see on the screen. I also like the app Edit Out Loud to have it read to me, or sometimes I just read it aloud to myself. This also helps me catch mistakes that I didn't necessarily see on the computer or while I'm reading it in my head. After I translate all of those notes into a cohesive second draft of the manuscript, it's time for beta readers. If you can't handle feedback, you are in the wrong industry, and I mean that with the utmost sincerity, but also the most love. Readers are going to be much more vicious than your friends and family. Goodreads reviewers are mean. If you've ever read the 1-star reviews of your favorite books on Goodreads, you will absolutely understand what I mean. Be prepared for feedback and make sure that the version of your book that you're putting out into the world is the absolute best possible version. But it's also important to remember that even the worst book you can think of has devoted fans. Someone loved it and believed in it enough to put it out into the world. Which means that even if someone doesn't like your book, there's every real possibility that there are going to be people who love it and think it's awesome and want it to be a worldwide bestseller. And honestly, you just need to find your people. But the most important thing is you need to believe in your book first, because if you don't even like your book, how are you going to advocate for it? How are you going to market it? How are you going to promote it? How are you going to get people to like it? So that is how you write a book. You start with your brainstorming, you outline, you draft it, and you edit and get some feedback from people. I wish you the best of luck with your creative process moving forward, and cheers, internet. See you next time. Sammy. Wow. Tell me why I can't get this camera to focus on my face and like stay focused on my face. This is me testing because the absolute last thing I want is to record another video where everything is not in focus. I want to die inside. Actually, I think I am dying inside. I was gonna have a cup of coffee, but now I'm thinking I need one. This one, Miss Austin, is biting me. Why are you biting me? Love me!